A former military man, who once cold-bloodedly killed hundreds of people, long ago left his service in the FBI and devoted the rest of his life to his family. However, one day, burglars break into his home, awakening memories of his lethal past. Will he be able to suppress the violence lurking within, or is he destined to drown his peaceful life in blood? The story begins by introducing us to the simple domestic life of a family man named Hutch. His life has long since become a monotonous routine, stuck in the daily cycle of home-work-home. One night, he wakes up sensing that something is amiss. After checking on his children, Hutch goes downstairs, where his suspicions are confirmed. As he tries to arm himself, the burglars catch him off guard. The criminals take the cash and demand more, but the man disappoints them by saying that everything else is on his card. At that moment, Hutch's son tackles one of the uninvited guests. Hutch intends to knock out the remaining burglar with a club, but for some reason, hesitates and asks his son to let them go. Reluctantly, the son complies and gets punched in the face before the burglars leave the house. The son clearly disapproves of his father's actions. Soon after, the police arrive at the crime scene. Hutch blames himself for not being able to protect his family. The police believe he did the right thing by avoiding violence, but his son is still angry that his father couldn't knock out the burglar. That night, insomnia plagues Hutch, and he goes down to the living room. His worries are interrupted by his daughter, and, reassured by her kindness, he falls asleep. The next day does not foretell anything unusual. At breakfast, the son asks for help with a report on the military, slightly teasing his father about the uncomfortable subject. His wife also inadvertently stings his pride by taking all the coffee for herself and chiding him for not taking out the trash for a week. Irritated and having lost his appetite, Hutch dumps his breakfast into the trash. Even outside, a neighbor hints at how he would have dealt with the intruders and then drives away in a brand new car, much to Hutch's envy. At work, Hutch is greeted by a colleague who also happens to be his brother-in-law. After a hefty dose of irony, he hands Hutch a gun and asks him to take better care of his sister. Later, Hutch crosses paths with his father-in-law, the factory director, who questions his idea of acquiring a company. In the evening, he contacts an old friend from his service days via radio, who is already aware of the robbery. Hutch explains why he didn't act. The gun was unloaded, and the uncreative thieves took only $20. At home, he learns that the burglars, along with the modest sum of money, also grabbed his daughter's favorite bracelet. Having had a rough day, this small detail pushes him over the edge, and that very evening, Hutch visits his father, who has ties to the FBI. Taking a revolver with him, he returns to the slippery path of violence that he once tread. He visits tattoo parlors and tries to find those informed about the tattoo that was on the burglar's arm. After some time, he comes across a group of seasoned guys who hint that his identification expired 20 years ago. After some misunderstandings, one of the men notices the tattoo on Hutch's arm and, frightened, hides behind a bulletproof door, thanking him for his service. This is enough for the tattoo artist to want to help. Soon, in the slums, he finds the very burglars he was searching for. A gun barrel peers into their modest family life, angrily demanding the return of the gold watch and his daughter's favorite bracelet. Almost taking a life, Hutch hears crying in the next room, and the blood slightly recedes from his boiling head. Stepping outside, in unbearable irritation, he vents his accumulated anger on a wall. After this failure, Hutch tries to return home, but a group of drunk guys interrupts the bus's progress. As they occupy the bus and attempt to flirt with a girl, Hutch smiles contentedly at the unfolding situation, seeing it as an outlet for his rage. After escorting the driver out, he demonstratively hints to the jerks that he will crush their heads, thus initiating a fierce brawl. It even escalates to knife fights, but the battered guys manage to throw Hutch through a window. Yet he doesn't relent, rising in a half-crazed state from the broken glass just to re-enter the bus and create an even bloodier mess. Returning at night, Hutch's wounds are tended to by his wife. He confesses to her that he has long missed love. Their relationship, and indeed their entire life, has become too gray and distant after several years of married life. After a while, a well-built man named Julian enters a luxury restaurant as if it were his own home. After passing through the scene and earning applause during karaoke, he meets with Russian mobsters who doubt his reliability. Julian immediately disposes of one of his subordinates, and after the violent act, tries to cast doubt on their doubts. This proves sufficient. It soon turns out that it was Hutch who had brutally tormented Julian's brother. The criminal authority visits the hospital rooms of his beaten subordinates, where one of the brawl participants gives him a transit pass that Hutch had dropped on the bus. At home, Hutch receives a call from an old acquaintance who tries to explain whose path he crossed. However, in an elevated mood, Hutch doesn't want to listen to his stories and prefers to spend time with his family. A few days pass, and he receives a message from an FBI informant who runs one of the barbershops. The intelligence agent reveals details about Julian, a sociopath with money and connections, capable of quickly ruining the life of anyone who crosses his path. Just at this time, Julian blackmails one of the Pentagon archive managers and pulls out all the dirt on Hutch. The Mafia leader is clearly unhappy with the catch, but he decides to send his hitmen to Hutch's home. Hutch sees the approaching raid through the window and hides his family in the basement, which is equipped as a bomb shelter. He hunts down the attackers and tries to neutralize them one by one, but eventually, he is subdued by a stun gun and thrown into a trunk. As he is being taken for a preventive talk with Julian, he regains consciousness and finds a fire extinguisher in the car, which he uses to provoke an accident. Making sure the hitmen have crashed, he quickly runs back home. There, he releases his family from hiding and apologizes to his wife, after which they leave. Hutch, who stayed home, talks to the half-dead gangsters. He reveals the motives for his departure from service. Once, one of the criminals had felt immense remorse and convinced Hutch that he would return to live a peaceful life. Hutch believed him and visited him a year later. Surprisingly, his words turned out to be true. The man had started a family and was smiling. Then, envy and longing to quench his own loneliness struck Hutch. Because of this, he left the service and arranged a modest family life for himself. He believed in this utopia and lived in it for a couple of decades, and now his dark past is breaking free. That same night, some well-meaning people with guns come to Hutch's father, but they fall into the old man's trap and are destroyed. Going all out, Hutch, at this time, goes to his father-in-law's factory and buys out their company with gold bars. He equips the entire factory with traps and brings an arsenal there that could arm a small army. Then, he single-handedly visits the Mafia and eliminates its henchmen, finally burning all their dirty money. Soon, Hutch meets with Julian and forces him into a conversation using explosives. He tells him that he burned all the Mafia's money, for which Julian was responsible. Julian gets angry and reminds him of his brother's murder, but he fails to convince the former soldier. Hutch knows Julian's secret desire to step down from his criminal activities and hints at it. Then, untouchable, leaves the Mafia's lair. Immediately after this, a desperate chase with a shootout begins. Hutch demonstrates advanced driving skills with a submachine gun in his hands and arrives at the recently purchased factory. There, his informant and father meet him, and they give the gangsters a baptism of fire. Retreating deeper into the factory, they activate the installed traps and fend off the intruders. Hutch's father skillfully entertains himself with a shotgun, while Hutch enjoys using his pistols and traps. The trio stages a bloodbath, and Hutch ends the blood feast by blowing up Julian. At this time, the police are already on their way to the factory. Hutch calls his wife and asks for another chance, promising that he will no longer let his bloodlust take over. While relievedly smoking during the FBI interrogation, he only answers that he is nobody. Someone calls the interrogators, and they suddenly let Hutch go. 3 months later, the family buys a new house, but Hutch receives an unknown call. With a meaningful expression on his face, he inquires,
"Does this house have
a basement?"
Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. After we reach 1,000 subscribers, you will enjoy even more interesting movie recaps.